As you'd expect from a From Software action RPG, Sekiro is tough. However, much of that difficulty can be curbed by learning all the nuances of the combat and, more importantly, how to approach combat. So, with that said, here are some quick tips to not only survive, but also master Sekiro's combat. Ironically, the number one tip of Sekiro's combat is to try to find ways to avoid having to be in combat as much as possible. This means being as stealthy as you can to whittle down the number of enemies you have to fight once the action does inevitably start. This is especially important for tough mini-boss enemies, since landing a stealth attack will literally take away half their health. Look for routes that take you into tall grass, look for paths that utilize rooftops, and make sure that when you stealth kill an enemy, no other enemies are watching. Ultimately, if you're always fighting mini-bosses and having to death throw them twice, chances are high that you're working a little harder than you need to. Obviously, you want to avoid fights where you're severely outnumbered, but when that's not possible, make sure you're smart about what enemies you decide to target first. Ranged enemies are extremely dangerous and also by far the easiest enemies to take down, so make sure to always get after them first. From there, your goal is to make it so that the last baddie you have to take down is the toughest enemy of the lot. Enemies generally cannot follow you when you use your grapple, so use that to your advantage to lure weaker enemies away from the pack, allowing you to take them down one by one until you're able to take the strongest enemy on in a one-on-one situation. One of the hardest aspects of Sekiro's combat is that virtually no enemies should be fought in the exact same way, if you intend to come out of a fight unscathed. Knowing what each enemy is capable of and how to counter it is vital to your success. For example, hat-wearing swordsmen will typically block and parry every strike if you just mash attack on them. But if you strike them just once, you'll bait their counterattack, which you can then parry and deal massive posture damage, if not just kill them outright. Dogs can be killed with a single shuriken. Spear-wielding enemies favor thrusting attacks, which can be either parried or Mikiri countered. Large and slow enemies should ideally be taken out by a stealth attack, but if that's not possible, just use hit and run attacks until they get mad and tire themselves out with a temper tantrum of strikes that will leave them with high posture damage. Shielded enemies can have their shields broken by the prosthetic axe and then instantly deathblowed. The point is, just going in, swinging your sword, and relying on reflexes and instinct alone is not the way to go in Sekiro. Every enemy has a weakness, so experiment with different tactics to find it out. Your defense is just as important as your offense in Sekiro, especially since it's often your defense that will open up your opponent's death blows. To that end, you have 4 main ways to protect yourself in Sekiro: block, deflection, dodge, and jump. Standard blocks are the least ideal, but also probably the most important form of defense. Enemies in Sekiro can be extremely erratic, making it difficult and risky to try and parry or dodge haphazardly. In these cases, you should generally just block if you can spare the posture damage. Deflections are well-timed blocks that either completely negate or dramatically reduce your own posture damage, and will generally open up an opportunity for a counter hit. It's important to note once again that thrust attacks can only be deflected, and if you just try to block them, you'll eat that damage. Also important to note that a deflection does not equal a guaranteed successful counterattack, so make sure not to get in the habit of mindlessly attacking after a successful parry. Dodges have much less invulnerability than previous Soulsborne games, so one thing that you need to learn real quick is to stop using dodges at the last second to avoid attacks. Use dodges as a means to put quick distance between you and your enemies, or to avoid grab attacks that are denoted by the red kanji and accompanying sound. And finally, jump towards enemies that are using sweeping attacks to leap off their head, then press jump again to kick them in the face and do big posture damage. Beyond that though, jumping is just a great way to avoid attacks and reposition yourself, but be aware that taking damage in the air is much worse than taking it on the ground. Sekiro's combat rewards aggression and punishes passiveness, but that aggression needs to be tempered by a knowledge of when to immediately shift to defense. Note that you can cancel a strike into a block within the first few frames of the attack, but once the strike is out there, you're vulnerable until the animation is done. So stay on the attack and keep up the posture damage, but learn the tells of each enemy to know when you need to start blocking. And finally, one thing that you'll have to adapt to, especially when dealing with the harder bosses of Sekiro, is the fact that they will often utilize combos that consist of a seemingly endless number of slashes, swipes, kicks, punches, and all other forms of strikes. It's extremely important to recognize when these flurries are coming, and rather than just outright dodging them, stand your ground and deflect as much as you can. Doing so will do a number on their posture meter and keep you in a position to continue your offense. Be on the lookout for this red symbol, which is an alert to let you know that the next attack cannot be blocked by normal means. It will either be a sweep, which can be punished by vaulting off the opponent and landing a jump kick, a grab, which can be dodged and counterattacked, or a thrust, which can be Mikiri countered or parried. Even with these tips, you'll probably still die. Die twice? And maybe even thrice. But hopefully they'll help you persevere and give you the confidence to work your way through Sekiro's challenges. Thanks for watching, and for more Sekiro, make sure to check out our review, along with our own wiki warlord Brendan Graber putting these tips to the test by taking down the tutorial boss of the game. And for everything else, keep it here on IG.